I'm not just talking theory here. Let me share with you my testimony of deliverance. Some of you have heard the testimony of how Linda and I got baptized in the Holy Spirit. And it's a testimony of the Holy Spirit's baptism, but it's also a testimony of deliverance. Because see, for years I resisted Holy Spirit. I grew up in a church and in a family that did not believe the ministries of the Holy Spirit was for today. I worked for a campus ministry that did not believe the works of the Holy Spirit were for today. I went to a seminary that did not believe the work of the Holy Spirit was for today, so that's what I taught. I taught tongues are not for today, healing is not for today, prophecy is not for today. After a while, God got tired of that. And so in 1982, after many, many attempts to get my attention, God just lifted his hand of protection and allowed the devil to have access. Now that sounds bad. It was the grace of God. It was the best thing that ever happened to us because it made me desperate enough to receive everything that God wanted to give. But what it meant is the enemy found that he had access to our lives. He put us through literally a year from hell. And we saw everything in our lives suddenly falling apart. I was sick all year. I went through bronchitis and pneumonia and a kidney stone, one thing after another. I mean, for close to a year, I could get up and speak on Sunday morning, go back home and go to bed sick and be sick in bed for the rest of the week until the next Sunday morning. I was miserable. Not only was I sick, our kids were sick all the way through the winter. I mean, our daughter had a sinus infection that just would not go away. Our boys were sick. We had doctor appointments at least weekly. Usually multiple doctor appointments at a time. Linda would keep a list on the refrigerator to tell who got which medicines when, because our whole family was sick and we could not get healed. Because of all the sickness and the medical bills, our finances were a disaster. The church was not doing well at all because back then we were a traditional pastor-led church. I was the pastor. I was the only one on staff, and I was sick in bed for the year. And that was really discouraging because we had just poured our lives into the church, and it was just falling apart. But worse than anything else, there was a tangible shroud of hopelessness and depression that just sort of draped down over us. And I thought, how could God let this happen to us? And I got mad at God. I got bitter. I got angry. And yet at the same time, I was calling out to God saying, God, help! God, you've got to do something. Our lives are falling apart. And then at the end of the year, God showed up. You can see the testimony in my book, Experiencing the Spirit. But literally, without us asking, without us seeking, without us even knowing what it was, God showed up in our house, literally overnight, baptized us with the Holy Spirit. Within 3 days, we were both speaking in tongues. And literally, overnight, everything in our life changed. Overnight, the depression, the oppression was broken. It was gone. The bitterness, the anger against God was gone. Overnight, we had fallen madly and passionately in love with Jesus. Every praise song we had ever heard was playing continually in our mind. The joy of God overflowed. Because see, when Holy Spirit came, all the oppression of the enemy was broken, and we were delivered. And see, that is what deliverance can do. All of those things you have suffered under the cruel hand of the enemy, week after week, month after month, year after year, that you've gotten used to, and you think that's just how it's always going to be. I want to tell you, those things can be broken off of you in an instant.